Welcome back. We got someone new with us here today, Jim Saunders, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida. Welcome. Thank you. Glad to see you. Happy holidays. I've never sung on this show before. It's a good thing, I think. Let's look back, first of all, to 2013, to some of the top stories. We got together before the show and discussed them, but Steve, we're going to start with you. There's something really important that happened in 2013, a number of things, but we all agreed that you had the best line.
Well, I think it's the reemergence of Charlie Crist in a strange and some very unpredictable situation, but it's been evolving for a long time, running as a Democratic candidate for governor. We've never seen this in the annals of Florida politics. Here's a guy who was a Ronald Reagan / Jeb Bush Republican. Here's a guy who wanted to be John McCain's running mate, remember, not that long ago. Now he's a Democrat, fully embracing what the Democratic Party stands for. So there's a new Crist, but the Republican Party is going to spend many, many millions of dollars. They've already spent a bundle reminding voters of the old Crist, the old Charlie Crist. So those two things are going to be, colliding for the next 12 months.
We've never seen the like of this before, have we?
No, we haven't. He's run as a Republican, run as an independent. The polls suggest that he's got a really serious shot at pulling this off, but it's a long way away.
Mary Ellen, what about you? What's the top story you can bring to us?
Well, Florida is never short of stories that catch the national attention, and once again this year, I think the story that got the most national attention was the Trayvon Martin case. The shooting of by George Zimmerman of Trayvon Martin, and the furor that it elicited. We had a sit-in in the Capitol in the governor's office that lasted a month. It produced national debate over gun control and gun laws, and it also raised some questions about racism in police departments, and it required the legislature to look again at the stand your ground laws, which it basically decided don't need to be changed. But that was a pretty big story.
And it lasted the entire year, and there was a task force, and here we are again looking toward 2014, and maybe talk of an expansion to that law in terms of, warning shot.
Right. I mean, there is
incredible.
Right, it really is. Yeah.
John, what about you? What's a story that jumps out at you from 2013?
Well, I think it's that Florida's economy is inching back. It's not roaring back, but we've seen signs where this past spring, the legislature, for the first time in 6 years, had a slight budget surplus, not a budget shortfall. That was a remarkable change. That made budgeting a lot easier for the legislature. Unemployment is at its lowest level now in 5 years, and there's one guy who's very happy about that. It's Governor Rick Scott, who has basically, hinged his whole political future to turning the state's economy around. And if he can convince voters that it has turned around, that could be pretty decisive in his race against what looks like Charlie Crist right now.
And Jim?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues is, at least legislatively and also politically, has been how Governor Scott came out sort of remarkably before the legislative session and supported an expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and Governor Scott sort of made his chops politically in opposing Obamacare and any sort of national health plan. He comes out before session, throws his support behind a Medicaid expansion, and then the legislature fights over it for the next couple months, but the House never budged on it. The House Republicans refused to go along with it, and here we are, several months later. Florida has not expanded Medicaid. And it doesn't look like that there will be any change in that position going forward. The House Republicans have dug in and basically said that they are not going to do that.
Thank you. Steve, looking forward to 2014, big story in Florida, probably the biggest, is the election for governor, but it's a big story nationally too in terms of trends. Let's, as a panel, but you start, Steve, let's talk about how you kind of see this thing unfolding and how you handicap it.
Sure. Well, first of all, we're the biggest state in the country with an open governor's race, with a race where an incumbent, is running, Rick Scott. The Texas governorship is open. This is the biggest state where an incumbent is seeking re-election. in that sense, really the race to some degree it's a referendum on Rick Scott's record as governor. He is, as John said, he's focused on the economy and creating jobs. Poll after poll shows that he is not personally popular with a majority of Floridians. He got elected with less than a majority of the vote in a year that was a great year for Republicans. He barely won, but he did win. It's going to be an expensive race. It's going to be a nasty race. And there's this question out there as to whether or not can Charlie Crist pull off this metamorphosis where he now has reinvented himself as a Democratic candidate.
Why is he not yet popular? He's been there for a while. His popularity numbers are essentially, Marilyn, almost the same as the day he walked through the door. Why is that?
You know, I think that a lot of it has to do with his resonance with people. He started off with his first impressions were pretty bad impressions. He had a really rocky first year. He also came into office with a lot of baggage, and a lot of people had negative perceptions of him. He just has not been able to, you know, unload that. I think that he has promised to raise about $100 million. There's a lot of speculation that almost all of that money is going to go into negative ads. I think, however, that they're going to spend a lot of it, not just on negative ads, but on raising the likability of Rick Scott and showing him working with business leaders, showing how he connects with people. You know, when you meet him personally, he's a really charming guy. And so I think that they are going to work to try and make him, you know, improve his appeal.
John, a trend in campaigning now seems to be to go onto the internet and use negative ads against your opponent. That's tried nationally and so forth. It's already started in the governor's race in Florida, where Democrats are putting out negative ads already about Rick Scott and negative rhetoric. How are they trying to define the governor right now?
Well, I think they're trying to question his competency as a manager, you know, and as a leader of the state. They're looking at a lot of the, you know, sort of a revolving door of agency heads, chiefs of staff, raising questions about the state's economic turnaround. You know, how successful has it been? What parts of society have been touched by this? And really the quality of the jobs that have been created under his watch. So I think they're really trying to get at a lot of you know, maybe some uncertainties that a lot of voters do have about, you know, is the economy better now? For many people, it is, but maybe their quality of life is still diminished, and the value of their home is still a lot less than it was 5 or 6 years ago. So there's those kind of questions that coincide with Scott's poor popularity ratings that the Democrats are really trying to exploit right now.
Let's turn the tables, Jim. How are Republicans trying to redefine or define the redefined Charlie Crist?
Well, you know, about, I don't know, months ago, we all started seeing emails every day popping up on our inboxes of Republicans bashing Charlie Crist on a literally daily basis, sometimes.
Months ago?
Months ago. So, you know, I mean, the Republicans have file cabinets and computers full of information about Charlie Crist in the background. As Steve said, you know, Charlie Crist ran, you know, in 2006 for governor as a Reagan Republican and a Jeb Bush Republican. Now he has totally recreated himself. And so I think part of it is simply going to be that they're going to say he's disingenuous and is all about himself as opposed to being, you know, out for the good of the state. The other thing that the Scott and the Republicans have already started doing pretty heavily is trying to tie Charlie Crist to the economic problems of the Great Recession. I mean, he was the governor at that time, and you know they're saying that Charlie Crist got us into this mess, and Rick Scott's getting us out of it. So all of that has already started, and you know, it may be a $100 million campaign, and I mean it's going to be ugly.
Steve, you and your colleagues at the Tampa Bay Times and also the Miami Herald have done extensive research into the whole issue of job creation and job incentive programs, tax incentive programs, I'm sorry, to lure companies to come into Florida to create jobs. This has been a centerpiece of the governor's time in office. You did quite a bit of work. Both the two of you did work on this piece. In terms of how much money has been put out there in terms of tax incentives to lure people to create jobs, how much has been put out there and how's it worked?
Well, since Rick Scott's been in office, we found the state of Florida has put on the table about $266 million in incentive programs to attract businesses. A couple of quick points. First of all, every state does this. A lot of states spend more on it than Florida does. And the argument the state uses is, look, we've got to compete with Alabama, we've got to compete with South Carolina for these same jobs. What we did is we looked at a few hundred incentive deals where the state is putting up incentive money, but more importantly, just as importantly, these are cases where Rick Scott personally has gone out to a company in Brevard County and cut the ribbon and shaken hands with the CEO and said, and I'm paraphrasing, but just as an example, this company is going to create 65 jobs. Each one of these has a specific number attached to them. We went back and painstakingly went back and said, okay, of this company, how many of those jobs actually exist today? It turns out the companies have between 5 to 10 years to create the jobs. That's built into the contract. They don't get the incentive money till they create the jobs. And a lot of the jobs are not yet created. They're promised, they're committed, but they're not here today. That's the point we were making.
Mary Ellen, you want to add to that? We've got
Well,
about a minute left.
Yeah, so the bottom line is that a lot of the promises are still promises and they haven't really been met. And the flip side to that is the part of the story that doesn't get covered, which we did explore, and that is the jobs that have been lost. Companies that didn't get a call from the governor and they laid off people. And there were, and that is not anything that anybody keeps track of in Florida government, how many jobs are lost. But we did count of those that are required to report to the federal government, there's about 50,000 jobs lost in just the companies that have over 100 employees. And most companies in Florida, of course, are under 100 employees.
Let's go to break.